Evening, everyone. We're at our Healthier Communities and Other People's Overview and Scrutiny panel. We should start off by asking for any apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Simon McGrath sends his apologies. It is I, Councillor Matthew Willis, in his place.
Thank you. Do we have any other apologies? Martin, Caroline, do we know? No. Okay. Have we got any declaration of pecuniary interest? Anybody? No? All right. The minutes of the previous meeting. We find it's okay, or is there anything that anybody wants to bring up? No?
Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to highlight to the panel that Councillor Peter McCabe was at the last meeting, but he's not listed in the attendance. And also under the work programme, we have colleague Caroline Holland, who has since left the council. So those will be updated. Thank you, Chair.
I think it's Peter McCabe coming. We did invite him. So he should be coming along later on. Thank you. All right, since there's no query to the previous minutes, should we get on to the Merton Winter Resilient Plan? So who's going to give a chatter? Is it Melody? Hello, Melody. You're on mute.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Oh, wonderful. I'm not used to using Zoom technology, so please excuse me. Is I think Mike Proctor as well from the ICB was going to be attending. Do you know if he's joined us?
He's just coming on.
Oh, okay. If you don't mind, I'll just give Mike a second to come along too.
Okay.
Hi, Mike.
Hello, Melody, and good evening, members and chair. Apologies, like Melody, I've struggled a bit with Zoom. I don't usually use it, but I'm here now.
Okay.
Mike, do you want me to do the presentation?
Yes, if you could, I'll just say a few words before we start. So
Okay.
I'm sure members will be aware that all health systems have to prepare a plan every winter. This isn't anything new, and Melody's going to take you through some of the salient features of the plan as it affects the borough of Merton for the coming winter months. I suppose by way of context, and this won't be anything you don't already know, we are bracing ourselves for possibly quite a bumpy ride this winter. The system has been under quite a lot of pressure right through the year, right through the summer months, so that given the fact that things tend to intensify a little as some of the seasonal pressures come on stream, then we know this is going to be quite testing. But we do have a plan. Melody will take you through some of the key features. So we are prepared, but it's going to be quite a challenge for everybody within the system, both in health and social care, to manage the pressure this winter. So that's just the context. But as I say, I'm sure you're all pretty well aware of that. So if I can hand over to Melody to take you through some of the main features of what we've got, and then obviously we'll be happy to respond to any particular queries or questions. So Melody, I'll take you through hand over to you because you're the expert.
Well, I'll try. Now, I don't know how many of you've seen the full presentation, and it gives you all of the details, well, a lot of the detail of the things that we do each year, and not just during the winter, but we find ourselves doing this at Easter and at particular times during the year when there's, you know, maybe like the funeral that the Queen's funeral that we had earlier this year. So there's things that we have to do to make sure that the system is ready and capable of coping with extra capacity, or extra demand, sorry, should I say. We have, each year we get some funding from NHS England to make extra plans, to provide extra beds, to provide extra care home places, to provide extra care for patients who can be discharged because they no longer have a clinical need, but they do need care and can't quite go home yet. So we sort of have a range of schemes that will support patients to be discharged early, and so that they're not sat in a hospital bed taking, you know, unnecessary sort of care that somebody else could, or a bed that somebody else could use. We spend an awful lot of time talking with our partners, with our community partners, with primary care partners, with the acute trust, and together we come up with these plans, and these are agreed locally. They're agreed amongst the Merton area, and they're also agreed at Southwest London and then a sort of London level. And based on whatever plans we've put forward, agreement is given and funding is given. And that funding is then spread throughout the winter months, and we usually sort of start from November till about March, where we put these extra schemes in place to manage the extra flow of patients, to manage extra beds, to provide extra services over the winter months. We have weekly, daily, monthly meetings. We have our emergency care delivery board that makes sure that that provides the sort of governance around what we're doing, make sure that we're providing the services that we said we would provide, and that if there are any changes or any requirements, that we're following through with those. And we have weekly meetings to make sure if there's any blockages in the system, if a patient's been delayed in discharge, those meetings are held so that, you know, we can talk to each other and work out what we can best do for those patients. And we also have daily calls. We have daily calls with the trust, with the acute trust, just to see what the problems they have with in the emergency department, with ambulance handovers, etc., etc. And we try to, you know, work and support as a system to work out what we can do to alleviate those pressures. We also have an annual plan which now includes COVID. So we do the COVID vaccinations, but we also do the usual annual flu vaccinations, and that's not just for patients but for staff as well. So there's a whole program of that goes along with it. This year, I would say that we've made a large investment in, you know, in the local area. So within Merton Council, we've spent an additional 880,000 just from Merton Council. St George's Hospital have had an additional £2.2 million of spend to support the discharges around the hospital, and our community providers have also had some funding to support some extra staffing to help support discharges as well. And we've got a Halo officer, which is provided by London Ambulance Service, and they will help as a sort of conduit between the ambulance service and the hospitals, to, you know, so that there aren't any delayed handovers, and if there's any escalation required, if there's any extra support required, they can make sure that happens. We've got a list of 9 objectives that we've been asked to achieve this year, and those objectives are, you know, as I say, at a high level, it's preparing for COVID and flu vaccines. It's increasing capacity outside of acute trusts, which is, as I say, extra beds in the community. Ensuring that our 111 and 999 services are working to the best that they can, and that they're fully staffed, and that we're implementing any new requirements as well. Again, as I said previously about ambulance handovers, we've got some objectives to make sure that we can support the London Ambulance Service in handing over those patients as quickly as possible so they can get back out into the community. We're trying to look at reducing crowding in emergency services and in EDs and finding alternative places that patients can have urgent on the day care, and whether that might be in primary care or in an enhanced primary care hub. That, you know, we're looking at all sorts of alternatives to, or urgent treatment centres, but as alternatives to emergency departments. And when a patient does need to be admitted, we're looking at trying to keep that admission to, you know, a short time as possible, so that as soon as a patient is medically fit, that they can move on and either go home or to an alternative suitable placement. And again, talking about timely discharges again, so therapists that we might need in the community to support patients to be able to go home, equipment services, so that if a patient needs to be discharged, that any equipment they might need to support them at home is instilled and installed as quickly as possible. And supporting patients to stay at home as well, so that, you know, there are some frail elderly patients who we can avoid an admission because we've got community rapid response services that will, you know, support that patient to stay at home and prevent them having to be admitted to hospital. We also have annually, we have a sort of communications and engagement plan, which our comms and engagement team will make sure that the local residents and all of the local services are aware of all of the things that we're doing and how they can access them as well. For Sutton and Merton, but yeah, for Sutton, we've had they've undertaken a similar process as us. They've got to follow the same guidelines, so they've done a similar process as us, and they've invested in the areas that they feel are necessary for the local residents, and working with St Heliers Hospital. This year,
just to cut in a minute, Melody,
yes,
and give a bit of explanation while you get your breath back. So clearly, members of this committee will be principally interested in what we have in place for the residents of Merton. But because the hospital configuration doesn't quite match the borough configuration, in that we have 4 main acute sites in South West London, but 6 local authority borough areas, there's a slight mismatch there. So most of the material that Melody's presenting relates to St George's, to some extent St Helier. Because St Heliers Hospital is just in the borough of Sutton, although very close to the border with Merton, Sutton team lead on the winter planning arrangements with St Helier. So that's why we've got a bit of Sutton in with this, in case that looks a bit confusing. So, but these measures cover both St Helier and St George's hospitals, although clearly Merton residents, especially if they live perhaps towards the Mitcham end, could just as easily go to Croydon, possibly in the case of an emergency. So there is that, you know, you can't quite draw those strict borough boundaries. So just to clarify that. Sorry, back to you, Mel.
No, that's fine, thank you. And also just to, you know, the last couple of areas that we're working with the local communities, we understand that the cost of living crisis is going to have an impact on residents and patients. So we're working closely with the local authority and doing some targeted work as well with them, just so that there's an equity of access for patients, and whatever we can do to support that as well. So we're working closely with the local authorities, as I say. A mental health crisis is, you know, is something that we do find that patients will turn up at EDs if they are in crisis. So we're making sure that they can be moved on to the appropriate placements, and that they get the appropriate care for their crisis at that time. And it also means that those mental health patients aren't necessarily in an inappropriate placement or setting, because the ED is not necessarily the right place for them. So that there is support in an ED for patients who are attending in crisis. As I said previously about the vaccination program, that we are, you know, we've always sort of managed with the flu, but now COVID is now an annual thing that we seem to be having to manage as well. I think that sort of about covers it really, and it is a whistle-stop tour, but if you've got any questions, then please do. I'll try my best to answer.
Thank you. Anyone with questions, please?
Eleanor, is that Councillor Eleanor Cox?
Yes, hi. Thank you very much, Melody. So I just had a quick
Sorry,
question
Eleanor,
around
I actually
how
asked
you might.
Martin. I'll call you afterwards.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Martin.
Thank you. I just obviously have a few questions, obviously, in relation to this report. Obviously, there is concerns about staff shortages at the moment. We obviously know that the NHS is very pressed for staff, but also, staff absences as well. How well prepared are you for this? And obviously, my other question relates to COVID-19. What are around your current numbers, and obviously in terms of the risks in case we have obviously a serious outbreak, and there is the chance that could well happen again, which places extra pressure on beds within hospitals. What's your preparedness in terms of this, in terms of extra space within our hospitals, if this may happen, which we hope it won't? And obviously there hasn't been past 2 winters, we've mainly been concerned with COVID, but obviously there hasn't been another flu pandemic. Obviously the risk of that happening is always out there, given that some of the people isolating did actually result in preventing some people from having admissions to hospital. You're just obviously interested in your thoughts on those points, please.
All right, can I just ask Councillor Eleanor to come and say a bit?
Thank you. Just very quickly, I wanted to ask whether your plan extended to care homes as well, because obviously during COVID, there was a lot of care homes that came under pressure and couldn't take that many residents in, and that could cause overflow and capacity to the hospitals as well. So, so just wanted to ask what your plans were and provisioning for that. Thank you.
Would you like us to respond, Chair?
One more, then you can respond.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to ask, you were talking about the take up of the vaccinations for COVID and the flu. I just wondered if you've got any numbers. Has that been a positive outcome with people taking those vaccinations? And also you spoke about the enhanced primary care hub in Merton. If you've got any more detail about that and how that is helping during this winter. And one other thing would be the contingency plans for the industrial action that may be coming this way. Have you had any consideration of how that will affect your plans? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you answer these 3 questions, please?
We can certainly try. So in terms of the staffing pressures, so there are a few elements to that. One is around just the general strain on staff. The second is the fact that the staff themselves can get ill during this period. And then the third is that we've just heard is the possibility of industrial action. The industrial action threat is a fairly new one, and one that we're not really used to in the NHS, certainly in terms of the delivery of clinical services. But the same measures that we have to make the staffing resilient for other purposes will be the same here. We've had high levels of staff absence due to illness, and specifically COVID, in recent months. Therefore, in terms of the sort of planning that we've been doing, so for example, Melody already referenced the bank holiday weekends, such as the Queen's funeral. We have built that into the staffing rotas in terms of making sure we've got medical cover, senior medical cover, right over those periods. And similarly, rotas are being adjusted for the coming winter period to try to absorb that effect. Having said that, of course, if large numbers of staff did get particularly sick, there isn't a great deal we can do, in that one can't really produce additional nurses or doctors at short notice. But the planning, insofar as it can be there with cover from bank and agency, is in place and is part of the plans that all of the providers have. So that, I think, is the main point on that. If I can pick up the issue around care homes, the short answer is yes, they are part of the planning in terms of the support we give to them, specifically in terms of making sure that both staff and residents of care homes are vaccinated and support is given in that sense. The other thing that we are going to do in terms of care homes is the issue of patients who are infected specifically with COVID, who are otherwise fit but have had COVID. They're fit enough to leave hospital, but there might still be a risk of infection. And what we don't want to do is put people back into care homes if they are maybe still infectious with COVID, even if they are well. So we have the what they call the TAD beds commissioned again. We had this at the height of the pandemic, and we are reinstigating that. So TAD is just yet another NHS acronym, standing for Temporary Alternative Discharge Destination, where someone is fit enough to leave hospital, but this is a dedicated sort of care facility, which is not necessarily the care home where they belong, but where they will be looked after. They no longer need to be in hospital, and we need to free up that hospital capacity for those who are acutely ill, but we don't want spreading COVID if that should become a major problem again this winter. Obviously, we hope not. And then there was the point about vaccinations. So there is a big push on vaccinations. Melody's already described some of the measures we've got. In terms of the stats, I don't have any at my fingertips, I have to say. I don't know if, Melody, you've got any figures in terms of the success rates, but it is something that we're monitoring. We are now getting into the peak of the vaccination season, specifically in relation to flu. And in terms of the measures that we're taking, both in terms of the staff, but also the population as a whole, is just continually promoting the needs for people to have their flu vaccinations. Our comms teams do a major campaign every year, but this year it's been fairly supercharged, and there are a number of initiatives to really try to drive home the message as convincingly as we can that there is an absolute need for not just vulnerable groups, but everyone really who needs or who would benefit from flu vaccine to make sure they get it. So I think those were the main things. I may have missed one or two. I don't know, Melody, is there anything else obvious you think we need to say?
Yeah, somebody asked about the enhanced primary care hubs. Yep. Just to say, I mean, primary care services have been enhanced and extended to provide an 8 a.m. to an 8 p.m. service, and that's 7 days a week. So in each area there is somewhere where patients can access those services. And at St George's Urgent Treatment Centre, there's also not just like GPs or providing services, but we've got emergency practitioners as well. So they're there, and they provide that sort of extension of same day urgent care. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm not as geographically aware as I in this area, but at Queen Mary's Hospital there is the enhanced primary care hub that provides care for minor injury and illness, and it also has again emergency care practitioners. So there's a lot of alternatives to just your ordinary sort of A&E departments.
Yeah, actually, Melody, that is the wrong end of the borough for Merton.
Yeah, see, as I said, I'm not sure about the geographics, but at St George's there definitely is that extension of the ED there.
So can I just ask, confirm, so that's for Merton, it would be St George's?
So that facility will treat whoever turns up, really. But just obviously geographically, it's not especially handy for Merton residents, but Merton residents could use that facility at the QMH. But there are facilities, additional facilities at St Helier as well. There isn't sort of same facility that we have at the Queen Mary's, but there is enhanced primary care provision throughout the borough of Merton to that 8 to 8 7-day a week service, which does two things. Firstly, it means that people can access primary care services, if you like, normal primary care services more easily and at a greater level of availability. But that in turn also, and this is the secondary benefit, prevents anyone who might otherwise end up at the hospital, but who doesn't really need to. It's just they go there because they can't get primary care attention when they need it. It prevents that from happening if they don't really need to be at the hospital, which is good for them, and also, of course, takes a little bit of pressure off the hospital facilities. So that enhanced primary care offer is available everywhere through the primary.
Eleanor, was your question answered? And Martin, were your questions answered?
Yes, I think they answered it. I think Melody and Proctor answered it a little while ago. Thank you.
Well, I've got a couple of questions. The ambulances, you said they're going to be monitored daily. I would like to know, how would they be monitored, and how are you going to look up about the pickup time? Because that's what people are worried about. They ring the ambulances and they tell them either they can't pick them up or it's going to take a few hours. And some people have been really, really ill, you know, and they've had to drive them in or get Ubers. So how are you going to monitor that, which I think is extremely important? And also, Halo officer. Why is he called a Halo officer? It's quite intriguing.
Okay, so the Halo is just yet another NHS acronym, I'm afraid. It's Hospital Ambulance Liaison Officer. That's all it is. But it is a very important role, because what happens when an ambulance arrives at a hospital, especially a hard-pressed accident emergency facility, the staff there are very, very busy. The ambulance crew similarly need to hand over their patient and get back on the road to attend to another call. So that interface between the ambulance and the receiving hospital is an important one. And what the Halo does is they can assist in terms of making sure that handover is as swift as possible, especially when several ambulances converge onto a hospital site at the same time, which can happen. You know, 3 or 4 can come from different directions at more or less the same time. And it's a question of making sure that the handovers are smooth, but also that we prioritize and that we don't get overwhelmed dealing with one patient when actually there's a more urgent case. So the Halo, and these are experienced officers who do this all of the time, and they move around between the hospital sites. They're not attached to a particular hospital. They go where the need is, where there seems to be the most pressure, to try and smooth that transition. So that's what the Halo does. To address your initial question, Chair, in terms of how we monitor it, so we have real-time information all the time through the computerized ambulance dispatch system. So if I had the right screen up on my computer now, I could tell you exactly how many ambulances there are at St Helier and how long they've been waiting. We've got that information at our fingertips at all time. In fact, I can see the picture right across London at any given time. So we know exactly where they are. In terms of what we do with that information, it's about making sure that we can move the pressure around the system if we need to do so. So, for example, if St Helier was absolutely swamped, but St George's it would still be busy because everywhere's busy just about all of the time, but was comparatively less busy, we can therefore divert some ambulances, especially if they're picking up patients who are somewhere between those 2 sites and could just as easily be transported to one another, to move them to where they're less likely to wait. That's better for them, but it's also better for then allowing the ambulance crew to hand over, because if they're in a queue of other ambulances trying to hand their patients over, it's going to take longer, and therefore that ambulance will be tied up at the hospital site when it should be back on the road and going to the next call, which addresses your other point, Chair, which is about the time that people wait. The biggest delays are caused when ambulances can't get to a call because they're still tied up in discharging the patients that they've had from their previous call. So that's why we need to make that handover as quickly as possible. which brings us back to where the halo in particular can be useful. I hope that gives you some answer, Chair, but please come back if I haven't addressed the point.
I've just to say, yeah, I can understand what you're saying, but I think basically it's more about the assessment when people are ringing up and they're being assessed by whoever's at the end of the call to see whether the ailment is either serious or not. They're the ones that sort of dictate whether they're going to be picked up or not. This is what I think you should be monitoring, because some people have been very seriously ill and they've been told, you know, they won't be picked up for about a couple of hours or 3 hours because they deemed them not to be serious enough, and people have had to drive them off to the hospital. Those things like that, I think we need to look at, because that's quite serious. Max.
Thanks very much, Chair, and Martin and Melody. Thank you very much for your presentation. I had 2 questions, if I may. Chair, firstly, I just wondered if you could provide some clarity from a position of ignorance, from my perspective, on what the evergreen offer is for vaccinations. And that's the first point. The second point I wondered if you could clarify was the vaccination centre at Centre Court. It says it's going to be open until the end of the year. And following on from Martin's point, should there be another outbreak, would that be one of the sites that you would consider reopening? I don't know whether that's possible, but I'm particularly interested on the evergreen offer. Thank you.
Mike.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I know one of the objectives is ensuring timely discharge, and whilst I applaud works in hospital at home, urgent care centres, virtual wards, the issue seems to be people getting into hospital and then not being able to get out. And I mean, like many people, I have a family member in hospital at the moment, and they're right next to someone with dementia who's been in there for 88 days because there is nowhere else for them to go. I was heartened in the report to hear that Sutton will have an 18-bed community hospital, and it made me think of those old cottage hospitals, you know, where people could go if they didn't need acute care but couldn't be at home. And I just wonder this winter, for extra capacity, if there's any idea whether we could get some of those closer to Merton, even if it was a Nightingale style setup. Thank you.
Hello.
Did you?
Yeah, obviously it's desirable for patients to spend as little time in hospital as possible and to get back home. But have you been able to recruit enough carers and district nurses to be able to cope with that extra amount of patients?
Sorry, I think that's your lot. And if you'd like to answer those questions, please.
Okay, so if I can work backwards from the most recent one, which was the community nurses. Yeah, you're quite right. There are capacity constraints, but what we do when we're extremely busy, because recruitment is difficult, we I think are fairly well staffed up in terms of community capacity. But when that system gets very pressured within community services, the provider has the ability to flex staff who are involved in less urgent care during very peak pressure periods, and if needs be, move them into some of the more hard-pressed areas if there is a lot of emergency work, or if we need to devote more energy into discharges. In terms of the question around community intermediate care capacity, so yes, there is that facility at Sutton, at St Helier, which you've referenced, but we have other schemes where we are purchasing additional beds in the community in care homes, and also expanding some of the community type beds that we've got. Certainly for both Merton and Wandsworth, we do have more capacity going into the winter season than we previously had. So yes, that is an important sort of step down facility that we have for those who don't need to be in an acute hospital anymore, but who still need some form of care. To go back to the point about the vaccinations, in terms of the mass vaccination sites such as Centre Court, At this stage, we are not using those mass fax sites, but clearly, if the needs arose, then because we've done it once before, then all of those sites could well be brought back into action. As far as I'm aware, there are no current plans to do so, but it's a possibility. And then the final one that I can remember of the list was around the evergreen offer, which simply means that, so for most of us who have had an initial COVID vaccination, then a second one, then a booster, we're in the system. What the evergreen offer is about is that anyone who, for whatever reason, hasn't had a vaccination, it's not as though the door has closed. Anyone can still get their first vaccination at any point if they go through their GP practice, or indeed go through the booking line. So in other words, it never closes. The opportunity to be vaccinated against COVID never goes away. That effectively is what the evergreen offer means. It's just to reassure those who, because we all went through that thing of getting the first vaccination, then the second, then the booster, etc., that those who sort of, if you like, didn't get onto that system, that they've missed the boat. They haven't. It's that offer is always open for everybody to be vaccinated. I don't know, Chair, if I missed any of them there. Melody, was there any I haven't covered?
No, you've got them all.
Okay.
You've got them all. I was just going to add that we also get lots of support. They were asking about sort of recruiting carers and community nurses, and we do get a lot of support from the voluntary sector as well, and they do provide a lot of support for patients to be able to, go home and be settled and help with shopping and stuff like that as well. So we do get lots of support from those as well, and charities.
John.
It was just, there was a specific question around care. Mike and Melody have said at the start that we work as a system during the winter to ensure that we work as a system, we work as smoothly as possible, to prevent admissions and for discharges for people from hospital. If you look at the pack, some of the bids that the borough have put in around care, we've got a very, very strong reablement team in Merton. So 95% of the people that are leaving hospital that need a care package come through our in-house reablement team. They get a very robust system of really getting them back on their feet, so that they don't need that care and they can go back to the level of functioning that they had before. Our stats are it's about 75% of the people that go through that team don't need any care at the end of that period. And we've put extra resources into that team. So that's part of our bid, was to put extra staff into that team so that we had enough capacity with that to deal with the extra people coming through the winter period. We've also as well, Keith is our Assistant Director of Commissioning. He's working with our 38, perhaps 40 home care providers in Merton, ensuring that they've got the right capacity in the right areas within Merton to manage the winter pressures. We've also commissioned, as part of our winter funding bid, a rapid response team. So that's an extra team within our home care providers that are able to really work very quickly with someone and go out in a few hours so that we've got a carer in someone's home within a few hours if it's needed to prevent an admission to hospital or to help with a discharge from hospital. I hope that answers a bit about the care.
Thank you, John. Peter, is there anything you'd like to tell us?
Sorry, no, Chair. There's nothing other than, I mean, I'm kind of here to listen and to hear the views of the panel and respond if there are issues that I think I can assist with.
Thank you. Is anybody else with any questions? Are you sure? Hold your peace. Okay. Thank you very much, Melanie and Mike.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Now going on to our day opportunity program, which is Julian Moore. So Julian, would you like to, oh, sorry.
Thank
Would
you, Chair.
start?
Thank you, Chair. So just to introduce myself, I'm Jill Moore. I'm the Head of Service for the Learning Disabilities and Transition Service in Adult Social Care. So we're presenting a paper which is to give you information about a programme of work that we're undertaking in adult social care. This programme of work is the Day Opportunities Programme for people with a learning disability. The paper outlines the process that we've gone through. I'll just say a little bit. I think you will have read the paper and then we can take questions. Essentially, this work started in planning in 2019, but was then interrupted by the COVID pandemic. And so it was picked up again at the beginning of last year, 2021. The council employed a social enterprise service to support with this. And the first piece of work that was undertaken was to have a consultation with stakeholders around the availability currently of day opportunities for people. By that we mean activities, day services and community options for people who have a learning disability and or autism. We set out a consultation to get people's views across all of the stakeholder group concerned. And we did that in a process of what was called the big conversation. So we laid out surveys across 7 different groups and had quite a broad range of responses on that. And we were very pleased because a high rate of those responses was from people with a learning disability themselves. Following that consultation, the social enterprise group put together for us a report which outlined the recommendations from that. We're working really with the intention of expanding, modernising and improving the offer for people with a learning disability in relation to what's provided within the community for those people. The paper just outlines that we currently have 3 day services. We'd like to have a wider range of opportunities and options for people. There isn't we have good day services. They're well respected and well managed. So the intention is not to remove that as part of the range of options, but just to extend the service that's provided within Merton. Following that big explore, we developed some pieces of work with some of those stakeholders. We have a stakeholder reference group. We've produced an options appraisal in terms of the ways forward, and we've looked at a commissioning framework for proceeding with this work. And we're now in the planning stage within adult social care with relevant officers looking at ways forward to enable this work. We're looking at a broad range of principles. Predominantly we want to, as stated in the paper, provide a greater range of choices for people within the community, make better use of our buildings and facilities, support the day services to also provide community hubs, focus on people's strengths, purposes and life aspirations, and to ensure that our services are well connected. One important point for us is that within the survey, some people with some of the younger group who have autism, or the younger people who are just transitioning from children's services, we know don't want to use traditional services, and we need to really enable a bigger offer for those younger people. So I'll stop there and ask about any questions.
Is there one? Oh, yes, sorry. We've got a gentleman on the line. I'm just going to let him speak first. George, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right, you've got 3 minutes. Would you like to speak?
Right. The provision of suitable and sufficient activities can improve the lives of those with learning disabilities or autism, particularly providing a series of activities filling up a block of time or a full day at a day centre can be particularly valuable, both to the client but also to the carers, giving them a chance to relax, do essential tasks, or just spend time with a partner. Speaking personally, the time my daughter spends at JMC is a real lifesaver, and we're very grateful to the staff for their excellent friendly service, which continued through most of the pandemic. Merton's plans to widen the range of available activities to meet the needs of younger clients and use a variety of premises, and this is obviously welcomed. There is, however, a wide divergence of ability in the clients, and some really need a system that provides regularity, dependability, and security. They like a measure of continuity re staff, place, and the chance to regularly meet their friends. So it is good that among the new developments, the use of a day centre with all its activities will still be available. The provision of reliable transport is really essential, both to reach day centres and to reach any new activities. Clients have different abilities and needs, and for some clients, independent travel training is workable and valuable. It can make a client capable of carrying out a particular journey, but for other journeys, the client may be dependent on having transport arranged. Other clients can't cope with travel training and they need transport. To reach a new activities, a good transport system will continue to be essential. It's no good providing a wider range of activities in various situations and clients not being able to reach them. Wheelchair users and their needs must have particular attention paid, re both the transport and the facilities at venues. It is of considerable concern that the planned changes are taking place at a time of severe financial restrictions. Carers are concerned that these financial problems will result in additional responsibilities being forced upon them. For example, if we're expected to organise the transport for themselves, it would be very time-consuming and cause a lot of extra pressure. Even if it's done using the direct payment system, that system can be quite daunting, and it doesn't always work as simply as it should. Even with a Merton managed account, you sometimes get odd letters to deal with, like saying you've got to pay a fine if you don't sort out your client's taxes, when that should be getting sorted out by the finance company, pay packet or something that Merton employs to do the managed accounts. So please try and get the system so it doesn't make work harder for carers, and please try and make sure you get sufficient funding. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Did you have a question?
No, I think I know what's going on pretty well. I didn't have a question.
Thank you very much. Anybody else with a question?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gillian. We heard in the last agenda item about how wonderful it is to have so many voluntary organisations in the borough, and they can apply for neighbourhood SIL funding at the moment. That's fantastic, but we shouldn't rely on them. So my question related to 4.7, where it says that a proposed savings target of 700 grand has been identified against the Day Opportunities programme, and I'm just wondering what that means in reality for people in the borough with a learning disability.
Anybody else with a question? Because we're not really doing budgets today. So, but
yeah, I've just obviously got a question. Obviously, it looks at next steps, but obviously it's quite limited in what it says about next steps. What sort of community hub would you be looking at exploring, and where would that be potentially located within the borough as well? Obviously, as well, in terms of governance structure on this proposal, what potential governance structure in terms of how this would work would you be looking at, and when will further reports come back on this item? Obviously, it's something I very much welcome as a whole in terms of the modernisation. And we obviously know that many people with learning disabilities have suffered as a result of the pandemic, obviously in terms of isolation, but lack of community activities. And it is obviously important that we do have a modern service, but obviously it's bringing that forward and creating the next steps going forward. Thank you.
Anybody else with a question? Oh, sorry, Eleanor, Ellie.
No problem. Thank you very much. And first of all, I think it's a really great. I reinforce what the others have said. I think it's a great initiative, and I've also attended community hubs, so I know the good work that is done there. But I did want to ask about potentially the opportunity to link some of the skills and the new training and activities that some of the people that are attending might do, whether they could be linked to skills that might be relatable to the workplace as well, because workplaces are becoming much more diverse. They're looking to be very inclusive, and I think a lot of people, with learning and L&D difficulties may well be highly employable and have a lot to offer society in terms of employment. So I just wanted to ask if you had plans around that and linking some of the activities to that.
Caroline.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about independent living as well, because a friend of mine's daughter, the place that she was, that her daughter was staying in with two other girls, that actually shut down. So they all had to go back to their parents. So I think there is a bit of a shortage of that.
Would you like to answer these questions for me?
Thank you. So first question, I think, was about voluntary organisations. And I just want to let people know that we do work very closely with a number of voluntary organisations. The one that's probably most prominent within Merton is Merton MenCap. I'd just like to second what George has said in terms of the need for support through the system. And one of the things that we are looking at as part of our programme is the potential for navigators, so people that would support carers to set up care plans, support plans for the people that they care for, to work their way through what is available, look at the menu options with the person with a learning disability, and enable them to kind of manage direct payments in a different way. And noting the point about transport, it is incredibly important for people who require it. We do have travel training available for people that can travel more independently or train to travel more independently. I think the next question was regarding savings. So as with all programmes, there's always a savings target attached to it. Adult social care is looking at all of its saving requirements, and we'll look at that across in an aggregate plan. So we will want to be expanding what we can do within learning disabilities, but obviously there is a need to look at opportunities for looking at value for money and savings within that. The intention is to maintain some of our day centres, because we know that, as George has said, there is a wide range of need for people with learning disability and or autism. So it's very important that we do have a range of services available. In terms of setting up community hubs, I think that was the next question. We will need to look at what buildings we have available, but what we want to create is a service that is flexible. So moving away from a traditional model or adding to a traditional model, we want to be able to provide a range of options for people to choose from themselves, and then to perhaps attend places on a sessional basis by themselves or with a personal assistant if that's required. And that might be provided through a direct payment. So there would be a menu of options, a menu of activities within a building, and there would be the option for them to, as it were, dip in and out of courses, training, etc. Also, in relation to the pandemic, yes, we know that this has had a big impact on people with a learning disability. And we have been looking at people's needs where they haven't been able to return to our day services. So we have people reviewing specifically people that haven't been able to return, working with their carers, looking at alternatives for them and making sure that they are okay, well looked after at home, that there aren't any other issues, and that where possible, if they can't return to a day service, because it is the reality that some people still don't feel particularly safe in a large group setting, that we are able to provide individual options for them, for example, personal assistance to access community activities that they do feel safe with. The potential for workplace activities, this is a really important part of the programme. We are looking at employability. We actually have a pilot running at the moment, which is managed within our provider services and augments the existing Merton Employment Service, which works to access employment for people with a learning disability and or autism. The pilot extends that by focusing specifically on younger people, particularly those younger people with autism or a milder learning disability or difficulty, where they may not need other adult services, but need a bit of support to start out, to get going and to get into employment. And that is really taking shape. It's having some success at the moment. And we have developed an employability forum where we meet together with all of our younger people's services and our special educational needs services to look at all that is on offer in Merton, so that we can work across all of those services and ensure people are working together, using each other's services and understand what is available right across the piece. And they've been mapping what is available in the last 3 months. Independent living is a very important factor of what we provide for people with a learning disability. We do have good availability. At the moment, we probably have perhaps a little bit more than we need in residential care. We want to look more at what we've got available in supported living. And so that's an area we're very interested in at the moment, trying to develop. And of course, we'd like to be able to have more within the Merton area, because it is suitable for people really to stay closer to family, to have access to the services, the teams that they already know within Merton. So very important, and all of these things link together really and attach themselves into the programme. I think the last question was around reporting. So we will come back and report on the progress. Next steps are outlined. In terms of governance, we will continue with our steering group, which meets fortnightly. We will continue with our stakeholder reference group, and we have established a provider reference group so that we don't have a conflict of interest. And of course, there will be regular reports to our Directorate Management Service and also to interested officers. In terms of the timeliness of reports, we don't have a proposal for the next return, but we can do that as soon as requested.
Can I just say, you've said the young people in the survey say they want something different to the usual. Have you started organising or started getting some, listening to what they want, and how are you doing it? And have they started? Are they appreciating it, or you're just in the discussion phase?
So I think it's a range of those things, really. So we are in consultation with younger people. We had good representation through the survey, but we use our existing boards. We work with our Kids First carers to get their views. We listen to young people who access the SEND services, and working with young people who are in our transition service as well. We've talked with young people as a result of the survey that was undertaken last year in relation to the impact of the COVID pandemic. And we also have young inspectors that we work with, particularly around the needs of young people. And we want to get more young people onto our reference groups. That's something we're working on at the moment with the young inspectors.
But I know you've got these people on it, but they tend to be the same people. You need to reach out to other groups rather than, I mean, Kids First is fantastic. So I used to be a member and a young inspector, but you really need to get to grips and get really the people that really need the support, because you're hearing the same thing from the same group. They might pass it on, but you're not getting the sort of some of the right information.
Thank you. Absolutely noted. And that's a very valid point. And we do want to reach out to a wider group of young people and other people with a learning disability. So thank you.
For that last point, Councillor, that's why we commissioned an external specialist agency to engage with our service users and their families. It was over 400 people that they spoke to gain their views. We also linked in very well with Kids First, Adults First, Merton Mencup and the charities, but we really wanted to find out what those young people and older people using the service wanted, which is why we went out for a specialist agency to help us with that, with skills in working with people with moderate to complex learning disabilities. And that was really important for us. I also just wanted, just very quickly, I know Jill's done, but I wanted to thank George for coming here tonight and just to put a little bit of reassurance to panel members. You may remember that just before the pandemic, we built and opened a new learning disability day centre at Leighton Road. That's a purpose-built day centre for people with moderate learning disabilities. Panel may remember I've presented this in the past, and I've presented it at the Learning Disability Forum and to Kids First and Adults First. The department also has a desire to rebuild one of our current day centres for people with learning disabilities into a state-of-the-art day centre for people with the most complex needs, alongside some supported living as well. We're not ready to go to explain that further, but we've got a desire to do that. When we listened to the young people and people using the service, they were very clear. A lot of people really like the day centres. We've got really good day centres. They're really well managed. But pre-pandemic, I'm going to be honest, they're quite old-fashioned. They're open 10 o'clock till 4 o'clock, Monday to Friday, and there isn't much outside that. So if a young person or an adult wants to do something at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, or at the weekend, or go to a pub or do something else, there isn't much opportunities for them. And during the pandemic, we kept one of our day centres open right at the start for the people with the most complex needs. But for those that didn't want to come to our day centres or weren't able to come because of the pandemic, we started working in a slightly different way. And we started working in a much more outreach way with the staff, because of our 4 day centres, we had one open to start with, then we opened another one, then another one, but for smaller numbers so that people were socially distanced. And we utilised that staff group to actually do things in the community with people, taking them out doing the things that they wanted to do in small groups. That was really successful because we were able to do things not just during those core hours, but a little bit more at night, sometimes at the weekends, if we were able to do that as well. And that's the model we want to look at alongside all of the other options as well. It's not just about day activities and day centres. Young people actually want to work. They want jobs. And we've got to, as part of this, find a process to get employers to recruit people with learning disabilities or autism, and build that into the model that we have, so that we've got volunteering opportunities for people with learning disabilities, opportunities in our libraries, in the council and other services. So it's not just all about day opportunities, it's building a better system that we can integrate people better into lives rather than busing someone every day to a day centre. So that's kind of the model I'm looking at. But to provide the reassurance, one new day centre built with a desire for a purpose-built specialist day centre for people with the most complex learning disability as well.
Thank you, John. But then again, you must remember those who are quite comfortable with the day centre. You have to make sure that everybody's included and not just our new ideas. Fantastic, but you still have to think of the others.
Good point. Thank you for that, Chair. And I can guarantee you that that will be done.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Are we okay? Right. Adult social care reform. That's going to be interesting.
Thank you, Chair. So this is primarily an information item for the panel this evening, and it relates to 3 key elements of upcoming social care reform. So it relates to reforms to the way in which individuals are charged a contribution for the social care services that they access. It relates to the introduction of an assurance programme that will be overseen by the Care Quality Commission for local authority adult social care functions. And it relates to support for the social care provider market, so primarily care homes
Sorry.
and home care. I think the first thing to say is that the paper notes as one of the recommendations that the panel should note that the timetables that are set out in this paper we think may change. And when the paper was written, the fiscal statement was scheduled for yesterday, so we had hoped to be able to update the panel this evening. But since the paper was written, the autumn statement has been moved back to the 17th of November. There have been media reports which suggest that the charging reforms and possibly the market, the social care provider market support may be delayed in terms of their implementation. But until we get confirmation of that, we just have to work on the basis that they will come in on the planned timescales. So just to take you very briefly through the 3 key elements. So charging reform, as I say, relates to the contributions that individuals are assessed to make to the cost of their care. And those contributions are calculated in part on the assets that an individual has, whether that be property or savings or stocks and shares or whatever it might be, and on their income. So there's an assessment of capital assets and there's an assessment of income, and the two taken together identify how much an individual will contribute to the cost of their care. And there are currently a set of thresholds. So there's what's called an upper capital limit, which is currently at 23,250. So anyone with assets above that threshold is expected to contribute the full cost of their care until they reach that threshold. And then between there and £14,250 of assets, there's a sliding scale. So the local authority starts to contribute to the cost of the care, but the individual continues to contribute as well. And then when they reach that lower threshold of 14,250, the council takes over responsibility for paying for the cost of their care. But that's also subject to the revenue, the income that an individual has. So it's slightly more complex than saying it's simply about capital thresholds, but in broad terms, those are the capital thresholds. The reforms which are scheduled to take effect from October next year will increase the upper capital threshold to 100,000 and will increase the lower capital threshold to 20,000. So the impact of that is that the local authority will start paying a portion of the cost of an individual's care at an earlier stage. So if someone had, let's say, £120,000 of assets at the start of their care journey, currently they would pay the full cost of their care until they reach 23,250. When the reforms come in, they would only pay the full cost of their care until their assets drop to 100,000, and we would then start. So there's clearly quite a significant potential financial impact for councils in that change, and government have previously said that there will be additional funding to support councils to meet the additional costs that come from those changes. And that's what we're currently uncertain about in terms of whether those plans will change as a result of the current financial situation, and what that will mean in terms of the timescale for implementation. The other element, the other key element of the charging reforms is the introduction of care cap and care accounts. So the care cap is something that's been around as a concept since about 2012. People may remember the Dilnot Commission recommending the introduction of a care cap, and that effectively means that it sets a ceiling on the amount that an individual over their lifetime will contribute to the cost of their care, and that's set at £86,000. So if that comes into effect from next October, we will have to have in place care accounts that will effectively be the place where we track someone's spend as it increases over time on their social care. And once that care account reaches that £86,000 cap, the council would then take on the full cost of that individual's care. So again, potentially a significant financial impact over time for councils. And again, part of the reason why the changes might be delayed by the upcoming autumn statement in terms of the financial situation. The really important thing to say about that care account and the care cap is that it relates to care that we as a local authority say the person has eligibility for. So in effect, an individual would has to go through the same assessment process as we would go through if someone was referred to us for social care. And it is for us as a local authority to say what needs that individual has and what needs are eligible. And it's so if someone is buying 10 hours of home care a week from a private home care provider and they're paying for that themselves, and they say, I'd like a care account because I'd like the amounts I'm spending to be added up towards the care cap. We might look at that individual and say, well, actually, we only think if we were providing you care, we'd only be providing you 4 hours a week. So you might be buying 10 hours, but it's only 4 hours that we will add to your care account each week, because that's what we deem you to be eligible for. And it would also be at the price that we would normally pay. So that person might be buying their care for £30 an hour, let's say, but if we could buy that care for £19 an hour, we would add £19 an hour to their care account, not £30 an hour. So it isn't the case that it makes, even if someone then reaches the 86,000 care cap, if they were paying £30 an hour, they'd still be paying the balance as a top up after they'd reached the cap. And the other element of that, which is complicated but important, is for someone in residential care, the cost of their placement per week, the fees they pay, includes an element for what are called daily living costs. So those would be the equivalent of rent for the room that they're residing in, food, utilities, and so on and so forth. And those aren't counted as care, those costs. So if you're living in residential care, the assumption is that £200 a week of your fee is covering those daily living costs. So again, if you were privately funding a placement in a care home, and let's say it was costing you £1,000 a week, in terms of what would be added to your care account, it would be the 1,000 minus the 200 daily living cost. So we'd be adding £800 a week to your care account. So that means two things. One, it means that it will take people longer than they might initially think to reach the cap, because it's not the full amount of their care fees that's being added on an ongoing basis. And then when they reach the cap at 86,000, we would have responsibility for paying for their care, i.e. the £800. They would still have responsibility for the £200 daily living costs. So it's a more complex set of changes than some of the initial publicity might have suggested and some of the initial media coverage might have suggested. And what that means is that if the changes go ahead as planned next October, there will be a lot of work to do at a local level to make sure that people understand all of that as far as we can possibly help them to understand it. Because otherwise we're going to, there's a risk that we will get a huge number of complaints and upset from individuals who hadn't properly understood that. So we will be, one of the things that we will need to be doing in advance of those changes coming into effect is quite a significant local kind of communication campaign, working through My Merton, working through our own comms team, but also with our voluntary sector partners and so on, to try and make sure that people understand the intricacies of that. So that's the kind of a quick summary of the charging reforms. In terms of the Care Quality Commission assurance, this is a little bit like the Ofsted process for children's services. And for those of us who've been around long enough, and John and I have probably both been around long enough, it brings back an inspection regime for adult social care. We used to have inspection regimes for adult social care, which ran until about 2010. So it's not completely new, it's the reintroduction of something. There are, so the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, are currently working on the detail of the assurance programme. It's scheduled to come into effect next April. It hasn't actually been signed off by Secretary of State as yet. So again, we're waiting for confirmation that it will come into effect next April, but I think there's less risk that that would be delayed. I think it's more likely that that will go ahead on schedule. And from that point forward, for the first 2 years, so from April 23 through until March 2025, it's Care Quality Commission will be undertaking an initial baselining exercise. So they'll be looking at each local authority and just getting a view on how well we're performing from existing evidence, from some inspection activity, from focus groups with residents and so on and so forth. And we will then have, if the plans go ahead as they're currently indicated, we would then have a rating system, a bit like Ofsted have in terms of children's services, but also social care providers have. So social care providers are either outstanding or good, or they require improvement, or they're inadequate. And there'll be a rating system similar to that for local authorities. And then the final element of the reforms is the support for social care providers. And we've just been through a first exercise to identify what's called a cost of care for the provision of older people's residential and nursing care and home care for adults of all ages. And what that's intended to do is to identify at a local authority level what a reasonable cost of care should be for anyone who's purchasing that kind of care. Because one of the long-standing issues about the social care market is that people who are privately funding their care tend to pay more for the same care as a local authority will pay, because we have much more purchasing power, so we are able to negotiate lower prices than private individuals. And there's for a long time been a concern that is inequitable and unfair for individuals who are privately funding their care. And part of the kind of policy direction is to try and equalise or get closer to what privately funded and publicly funded care costs. Again, that has quite significant financial implications. So again, if that comes into effect from next year, government have committed to providing additional financial support to local authorities to help with the implementation of that. But we've had no detail yet about how much that additional funding will be. And that means we've been very cautious at this stage in terms of our initial reporting, to Department of Health around what we think a fair cost of care might be, and we're not publishing that anywhere. And that's a nationally shared position. So local authorities across the country aren't publishing their cost of care data at this stage, because clearly for local authorities and all of the funding pressures that we've got on us, it wouldn't be sensible to be making financial commitments that the provider market might try to hold us to if we don't actually have the funding to meet those increased costs. So these are all quite significant changes. And as I say, we'll hopefully know in a couple of weeks' time whether they're going ahead to the timescales that are set out in the paper. So primarily, so CQC assurance from April next year, the charging reforms from October next year. And if they are going ahead, it may well be that the panel will want to look at some of those issues in more detail at a slightly later date once the national policy framework is slightly clearer. So this evening's paper was primarily an opportunity to introduce that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Martin.
Thank you, obviously, for that report. Obviously, it's a huge change for the local council. I mean, obviously, I have concerns about whether this will proceed next October, given that the current plan is that it was to have been funded from the national insurance increase. Obviously, that has been dropped, and I believe it is still the policy of the Sunak government. That who knows whether that will change or not. And that obviously now they're looking at general taxation. Clearly, from reports, there's a £50 billion black hole in the budget, and it's whether obviously this is deferred or not to a future date, which I think will be obviously disappointing, given that addressing this has been a major policy challenge faced by successive governments over many years, and obviously doesn't need short-term solutions. It needs long-term solutions and long-term solutions that actually work. Obviously, the other point as well in terms of care costs, £200. We obviously know that inflation is running at 10% at the moment, and obviously it's whether they are going to be reviewed before, if it does decide to implement, the figures will be reviewed beforehand, given that this could have a potential major impact, especially as we know the cost of care is rising. I believe it's above inflation, and clearly they have challenges obviously in terms of how much they pay their staff, obviously in terms of London living wage, but also as well the recruitment challenges. I think we obviously have mentioned it earlier in terms of the National Health Service, but we obviously know that care providers are under the same challenges, especially obviously where the employment pool has been incredibly limited, in terms of people wanting to undertake these jobs. I think as well, the other point I'd like to raise is obviously the uncertainty it does create in terms of local authority budgets, in terms of passporting. We know we're facing yet again another round of austerity, as if we haven't had enough over the past 12 years, which could well have a major impact in terms of our budgets. And especially obviously if more of that cost is then not fully funded by government, but it is obviously then for the local authority to find it within existing resources, and that's going to be challenging given obviously the rising cost pressures. So I think those are the points I'd like to raise. And obviously, sorry, there is one final point. Obviously in the Care Quality Commission insurance, obviously in terms of how these inspections will be undertaken, obviously Ofsteds are undertaken at fairly short notice. Will it be with a week's, 2 weeks notice, or will you know far enough in advance, obviously in terms of preparing this, because we obviously know there's staff resource intensive as well, and obviously I'd be obviously interested in hearing your views in terms of that, because obviously we know that Ofsteds aren't every year, they're every few years, in terms of the services, children's services which they regulate, but will that this does mention it will be yearly. Clearly obviously it's yearly that will be a significant demand upon the authority as well.
Thank you, Ellie.
Hi, thank you. So I wanted to ask you around the future of care, because obviously there are significant costs attached, and I mean, for a long time, the costs of care have been rising and are generally by many considered to be unaffordable, where people have had to give up their homes in order to pay for care. So I'm keen to ask, I mean, when I look at things like Anchor Trust merging with Hanover, which obviously happened a few years ago, it points to me that one of the directions of travel is actually not everybody wants to be in a care home, and care homes have moved away from being residential much more to dementia services, and actually there's more provision at home, which is one, what people seem to want, and two, it's more affordable to actually provide that level of care. So I'd be very interested in hearing your overall plans as to what is the future of adult care services. Is it changing and moving away from care homes, where care homes are used more for those who genuinely absolutely need those services, and away from residential services and into more at-home care, where it's you know, that there seems to be, the private sector seems to be moving slightly more towards that?
We'll do a combination here between myself and Keith. So for Councillor Welton's comments, this is a huge exercise for us. The charging reforms, the fair cost of care, and the care quality assurance are immense. It is a major task that my department, with Keith, we are going through just now, and we are still doing it in preparation. But the ones around the charging reform and the care cost of care, the Sunday Times yesterday, there's an article in there that it'll likely not go ahead because of the costs. And there's other, through ADAS and other places as well, saying it won't go ahead. But we are still preparing and doing the work and the preparation. But I need to really stress what a huge change this is for us. It's not a small change. This is a major change for adult social care. Now, there was a question about the care market and around the care quality assurance, and I'll pass you to Keith, because Keith actually leads for the Association of Directors on the Care Quality Commission implementation, so he'll be really good to answer that one.
Thank you, John. No pressure. In relation to the Care Quality Commission are still developing that methodology, that inspection methodology. We know that there will be inspection activity in a similar way to Ofsted. We don't think it will be quite as intensive in terms of the number of people on site, for example, and the length of time. They will give us notice, but it's likely to be in a similar way to Ofsted give notice. So they give you a window of time and say, at some point in these 6 months, the inspection will happen. So it's really about being ready at the beginning of that 6 month and then staying ready until the day they turn up. But what they're indicating is that there will be more of an ongoing conversation than there might have been under previous inspection methodologies. So they might come for a day and look at something very specific. And then they might do an online focus group with a group of local residents, or they're going to they're going to do it in a number of different ways, I think. The annual element is a self-assessment. There will be an annual requirement for us to complete and submit a self-assessment of our performance, our progress. And once that's into a cycle, we will be expected to say how we're going to improve over the coming year. And then next year, say, have we done what we said we'd do? And that will become a kind of rolling process of delivering improvement. So we will get notice for those inspections, but it's likely to be a kind of window of notice rather than we're coming on the 3rd of March next year. It will be we're coming between the 3rd of March and the 3rd of October or something. But as I say, there's likely to be more smaller amounts of activity on an ongoing basis rather than big set piece inspections. And then just sorry, in terms of the social care market, I think it's absolutely right to talk about a shift from residential, and when I say residential, I mean kind of traditional residential care, to more of an extra care supported living type model. We have a reducing number of residential care beds in the borough, and we have a number of extra care residential schemes in the borough. So those are schemes where the individual has their own front door, it's generally self-contained accommodation, and they have a tenancy for that accommodation, and the care and support is provided on an individual basis based on need, with an overarching element of 24-hour availability of care staff and support staff. And that's a model that we want to continue to promote, partly because actually the traditional residential care market is increasingly not economically viable. So we think the market will continue to reduce. So it's important to have those alternatives in place. But what we also know is that a lot of residential care providers are moving towards a model where they're providing a much more intensive nursing care type service. So it's almost as if the market's going in two directions almost. So it's going more intensive at one end in terms of nursing care and specialist care, and then at the other end less intensive in terms of supported living type accommodation with care and support, replacing previously what would have been residential care. And that's a model that we think is good and that we want to continue to support.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask something. It's probably, I don't really understand all of this, but obviously you're saying it's based on people's assets, which really you're talking about the house, but you could have two people with the house that's worth exactly the same amount, but their actual fixed income is going to be vastly different. One person might just have the state pension and the other's got like a gold-plated civil service pension or whatever as well. So would the council be expected to pay the same amount towards the care for both of those people?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for your paper. Like Caroline, this is not my area of expertise at all. But I just had a question. I was interested in your digital hub, and it's something I've raised before on the panel around the opportunities that present themselves through digitization. And we normally talk about that in the context of health, but rarely have I heard it discussed in the context of social care. And I'd be interested to hear about what you see as the opportunities for digitization, how it can lead to greater efficiencies, etc. But and you know what steps you're taking to make sure that Merton is able to reap the benefits eventually of a more digitized social care provision. Thank you.
Now, so do you want three? Okay. I just wanted to say, Keith, I was really heartened to hear about the work you're going to do on comms, because on my first reading as well, you know, people will still need to sell their homes if they want to move into a care home, and that has not been explained to people. And I acknowledge the really challenging position you put in throughout this period, all of you, by central government. But obviously the change to council is going to be like, at the moment, there's like a £9,000 range where the council commits to some of the costs, and that's going to become 80,000. And you've spoken a lot about increased costs, but it's the increased admin that I'm really worried about that's going to be so immense. Obviously that has costs, but I mean, in regards to whether the council is actually capable of it. I mean, if someone wants their costs to count towards the care cap, they need to report for an assessment. We need to be providing so many assessments. We need to set up a system that keeps their data for 99 years, which might touch on Max's digitization point. There's just so much to do, like basically by October next year. Has the £126,000, that's like 25% of the amount given already, been spent? How's it going to be spent well, and is it going to be ready?
Okay, so Chair, I'll answer those questions in reverse order, I think. So I'll start with I'll start with a question about preparation. I'll then move on to digitisation, and then I'll come to the income and assets point and how those are assessed. So in terms of preparation, the 126,000 is specifically in relation to the fair cost of care exercise. So we've used that for additional specialist resource to help us to do all of the analysis around that, and that supported the submission to Department of Health last month. So that's what we've used that for. Again, government have said there will be additional funding for the implementation of the charging reform from next October, and we're waiting to understand if that goes ahead, what that amount is, because we don't have the detail of that additional support either. But there are going to be so in terms of our ability to do it, we have the knowledge, we have the expertise, because it's effectively doing more of what we already do. What we don't have at the moment is the resource, and the recruiting social workers is incredibly difficult in London. Recruiting people with the financial assessment skills to do financial assessments is very difficult in London, and every London borough will be facing the same challenge, and we'll all be trying to recruit those additional resources at the same time. So it is a significant challenge, and it's a significant worry. But it's also a good segue into digitisation, because actually what we're trying to do is look at ways of, for example, using online self-assessment as a means of people doing their own assessment. And we think that because the people who will be coming to this new are people who are privately funding their care currently and may have family members who are helping them to do that, we think that while it might not be the right thing for the individual to do an online self-assessment, they may have family members who can help them to do that. So we think that there's a real opportunity there, and that potentially is a way of reducing the requirement for face-to-face intervention, if you like, and therefore for additional people to do those additional assessments. And there are different ways of thinking through how that might work. So we might decide, for example, that if someone puts in their answers and it comes out with a very low cost in terms of what their self-assessment produces in terms of a budget, we might just agree that. If it's a higher cost, we might do follow-up work to understand that. But there are different ways of doing that, and that's part of what we're working through over coming months. Allied to that, we're looking at a digital solution for care accounts, clearly. And again, as far as possible, we want that to be a bit like an online banking experience for people. And again, individuals themselves may not feel comfortable with that, but they may well have family members who can help them with that. And I know that when my mum, for example, became unwell with dementia, we had lasting power of attorney, so we were able to do her financial stuff, and it was an online banking solution. And the care account, we want to work in a similar way. So it means that once we know an individual's cost, it will be automatically added each month. There isn't a manual intervention on an ongoing basis. And that, I think, will make the administrative burden much easier to manage. But we want that online solution to be much more than just a money counter. We want it to link to our advice and information resources. We want to make sure that it can refer people to the community hub. We want to make sure that it can refer people to Age UK or to wherever, so that it becomes a way that people can actually think, I've got care needs, I'm going to apply for a care account, and they'll start and they'll see, actually, I could go there and talk to that person and they might be able to help me. So we'll use it to try and not divert people away from us, but signpost people to better solutions, if you like. So I think there are all sorts of opportunities there. And we're working with a very large multinational global supplier of online shopping solutions with Amazon Web Services, who are giving their time for free to help us to look at potential solutions. Now, that doesn't mean that we will work with them in the longer term, but it's been a really interesting exercise because they have a huge expertise in what makes an online experience attractive to people, whereas our traditional social care IT suppliers don't. So we're working with the people who actually could make this a really attractive and welcoming, if you like, offer for people. And that's what's really interesting about it. And then I think, so the question about assets and income, so the financial assessment is a combination of what are your assets and what is your income. So even if two people have a house each worth £500,000, but one has an income of state pension and the other has a very significant income from investments or whatever it might be, the person with the very significant income will make a greater contribution to the cost of their care because the financial assessment will take that income into account as well as the asset. So it does differentiate in that way.
Thank you. Anybody else with any questions? Any queries? All right, thank you very much, John. And my brain just went a bit clockwise. Have you got something to say, Peter? You look like you have.
Well, Chair, the one thing that concerns me about all this, and I think the officers have clearly got a responsibility to remain politically neutral, is that we've had promises to fix social care. We've had promises to fix the cap and solve all these problems. And the sense that I get is that there's a huge amount of work and effort and thinking and expense being undertaken. And it's possible that within a few days, we may be hearing that large chunks of it are not going ahead. Now that could be not going ahead or deferred, or it could be some new scheme coming up. But it just troubles me that there is so much uncertainty and there's so much to do. And the last thing you would want to do in such circumstances is waste people's time. And it may well turn out to be a huge waste of time. And it's time and money that we don't have.
Thank you. I do agree with you. So thank you for that. Have we finished? Has anybody else got anything else to say? No? Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yes, thank you. You can stay or you can go. We've just got to work through the work program now. Thanks. Should we have a look at the work program? Right, this is just to note January's one, unless somebody's got anything they want to sort of add on to it, or we can have a look at.
I would just ask, I'm only a substitute, so I may not be here in January, but will there be advance sort of notice of the budget? Because obviously today it said budget and we've not spoken much about finances, and with Caroline's departure, which was already noted, not sure who's presenting that in January. Will we get an ability to scrutinise the budget properly?
Yes, the budget will be in January. We will get notice of it. There was nothing to do with the budget today, because I think everything needs to be started basically, not from scratch, but they want to put everything together, cost and savings, so that we get the right view of what's happening rather than bits and pieces. So we will get notice of it, and you will get a chance to scrutinise it. Okay, but tonight it was more about care services and stuff rather than the budget. Okay. Anybody have anything else they want to put on the work programme? Max?
Thank you, Chair. One of the things, I mean, I think all of the topics, not just for January, but for the remainder of the year, are all really interesting. One topic that I wondered what other colleagues thought about was something broader, following on from the council meeting in July on the social determinants of health. And it seems to me in Merton, the report was good, but there is a question around data, and I guess maybe it's a sort of pervasive theme, but obviously we know that access to good health is not just access to healthcare services, which is obviously the remit of the council, but something around the social determinants of health I thought would be interesting. And just one sort of small point, it was something I picked up from, I think, that report for the February meeting on suicide prevention. I don't know whether it would be possible to look specifically at why Merton has a higher suicide rate for women, something that was brought to attention in the report, but without a sort of reason as to why that was the case.
Yeah. Do you have any statistics? Can we look at that?
Yeah. Chair, in terms of the question raised by Councillor Austin, we'll be looking at the annual public should provide some information on the wider determinants. I don't know if that will be enough, or we wanted a separate report.
No, it's my first time on this panel, so I'm not quite sure what each of the items necessarily referred to, but providing we do cover that at some point. But I think the point on the suicide prevention, you know, is actually a case in point on there may be a social determinant behind that, we're just not looking at. But it's something, as I said, that it came in, I think it was Councillor McCabe's report in July, and but as something we've identified that differentiates Merton from other boroughs or other areas, and it might be worth looking to that, as well as looking at the age groups that you've suggested.
I think we should wait and have a look at the report. It's February, isn't it? What's coming up in February, and then we'll see what's there and what's not there, and then we can ask for further details, because what we're asking for might be there already. Because if they're going to give us information about suicide, there should be quite a lot of details rather than just.
Shall I to include that?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah. Anything else? Have we acknowledged, taken note of what's down for the 10th? We agreed to it? Okay. Well, I shall call it a good night for everybody. Safe journey home. Let's hope the rain stopped. The thunder was quite scary.